Little when the sun goes down, we go walk. Hi lovelies, welcome or welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Maria and today's video is going to be my October reading wrap up. So just going through all the books that I read in October, letting you know if I liked them, if I didn't like them, and if I recommend that you pick them up. So I feel like October was a pretty good reading month for me. I read 10 books. I am actually nearly finished. So it's the 2nd of November when I'm filming this and I was nearly finished another book yesterday. So it could have technically been put into my October reads, but I think I'll keep that as a November read. But overall I ended up reading 10 books. And in terms of my October TBR, there were only 2 books that I didn't end up reading. I didn't end up reading The Ninth Rain and Servant of Earth, and reason being was I just didn't want to start too many new series and I'd already started quite a few. So most of the books I read in October were either the start of like a duology or standalones, because as I say, I'm trying not to start too many new series, or at least if I'm starting a new one, trying to make it where it's not a long one. So didn't quite manage to get to those, but I had quite a few arcs and things like that that I needed to read as well. So I still feel like I'd done pretty well on the books that I intended to read in October. So the first book I read is a book, I don't have the physical copy of it, but I will probably be getting a copy of this series. And basically it was called Our Long Days and it's by Ronnie Matthews. Now you may have heard me speak about this series before. I met this author at the Belfast Books and Ball Gowns event that I went to in June. Picked up the first book in her series and literally as soon as I read that first one, I flew through the next 2 that were already out, and this one just came out at the start of October. But I did very luckily get an arc for this one as well. But this is an interconnected standalone series. It's a small town romance. We're following basically this one family and their romances. So there's 3 brothers and 1 sister, and I don't really want to say who the 4th romance is about because it does kind of spoil it if you haven't read it, and it is a nice kind of surprise kind of seeing that develop throughout the series. So I won't talk too much about this book, but I ended up giving this book 5 stars. I really loved it. Flew through it, and this series I would say if you like Chestnut Springs you should definitely pick this up. So it starts with, I thought I'd just get the first book, so it starts with those 2 words, and this one is following Patrick and Joanna. So they're kind of childhood best friends to lovers to kind of being separated for some time. They haven't seen each other for around 6 years, and at the start of this Joanna is coming back to help work at the restaurant that both of their families own. So obviously there's going to be a bit of forced proximity, they're going to have to work together and the story goes from there. But I just really loved these stories individually and also together. Obviously as I say, it's very much like the Chestnut Springs series. If you really enjoyed that you'll probably like this as well. Small town romance centering this family. You kind of have all these side characters that build into this kind of found family as well, and I just really flew through them. I would say they are pretty spicy, so just a heads up if you like that. There's plenty in here. If not, I would still say that the stories around this are still good. I don't think it's centered around the spice, but it is pretty spicy, so it's just a bit of a heads up on this one. But really love this series. It's called the Sutton Bay series and I only have this first one. This is the one that I got at the event, but I think I will collect the other 3 and have a full set of this because I really enjoyed this series and I think they're really good palette cleansers as well. Between if you're like me and you read a lot of heavy fantasy or anything like that, these were really good, fun, quick palette cleansers to read in between, and I just really loved them. Really loved the characters. Definitely think it left a lasting impression on me, and it's one I definitely think will blow up, but at the minute it's a little bit underhyped. So if you are looking for a new interconnected standalone romance series, I definitely recommend this one. So next up, I do have a physical copy of this one, but my sister's actually borrowing it at the minute, and it's The Bewitching by Sylvia Moreno Garcia. Now, I've read by Sylvia Moreno Garcia before. Really love her writing. You may know her from Mexican Gothic. That tends to be kind of her most famous one, and I read that, loved it. It's kind of the type of horror that I would enjoy. So I'm not really a big horror reader, but her horror I do kind of like it because it's kind of literature fiction mixed with a little bit of horror as well. It's not too scary, so if you're like me and you're a bit of a wimp and you want to look for like a horror novel that you think you could read, I'd definitely recommend her books. But I'd seen this book came out in around July and I thought it would be the perfect book to kind of read at the start of October to get those witchy vibes, because basically this one is following 3 women from 3 different timelines who are connected by this mystery in terms of disappearances and murders and things like that. So you're kind of following them along as they try to figure out what's happening, and you're kind of seeing the dots connect between those 3 stories. And I think the way that Sylvia Moreno Garcia done that was really masterful. I really loved the way the stories blended together. I was fully invested in all 3 of the POVs, because sometimes you get stories like this where you're following 3 different people and you kind of have your favourites. You have 1 or 2 that you may prefer over another one, but for this I felt fully invested in each of the POVs and I didn't feel like it was lagging at any point. So I feel like it kept the momentum where I wasn't feeling like I just wanted to get back to do another POV, but I just really loved the shifts between, it was kind of rural Mexico in the early 1900s, then we shifted to 1930s New England, and then we had kind of a present day, but it was in the 90s in the same setting as the 1930s setting. And the way that the story was just weaved together, as I say, was just done really masterfully. I will say though that I do think that the pacing did lull a little bit at the middle section, and the ending was a little bit anticlimactic for me. I was a little bit disappointed in how it ended. I was expecting something a bit more, and it just felt a little bit predictable when we got to that end bit, but other than that I did really enjoy this one. Ended up rating it 4 stars, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for literary horror, kind of generational mysteries filled with folklore and something that'll give you kind of that eerie feeling. I think you'll really enjoy this one. But yeah, I ended up rating this one 4 stars. Next up was my book club pick for my favourite book club, so Tulips and Tales. I always have the link in the description of my videos, so if you do want to join along, just go down there and click that and join us. We have picked our November book as well, but this was our October pick, and it was definitely a really good pick for October. It had those witchy vibes, but it is much more of a cozy witchy vibe. So this is Rewitched by Lucy Jane Wood, and I think overall I would kind of explain this as giving the same vibes as Sabrina the Teenage Witch. So if you watched that in the 90s, and I don't know if it was the early 2000s as well, but I watched it in the 90s. It kind of had that same cozy feel, and I did really enjoy this, but it definitely wasn't anything kind of stand out for me. So in this one we're following Belle, who is just about to hit her 30th birthday and has had her magic since she was 15. Now within this world there's kind of this council that when you become 30 you have to kind of go and get reviewed to see if you've made the most out of your magic, and Belle definitely hasn't done that within the last 15 years. So she ends up going off to have to try and prove herself, to prove that she has a right to her magic, and the story kind of goes from there. I really like the atmosphere that Lucy Jane Wood built here, so it definitely felt like kind of crisp and cold October mornings, and you could really feel that. It was quite palpable in the way she was writing. There were quite a few passages that I was kind of highlighting on I had it on my Kindle as well, but I was highlighting it while I was reading it. Just her descriptions of the street and kind of the atmosphere around them were really, really beautiful. So I really liked the writing style in here, and I think it done a really good job of kind of exploring themes of self-worth, self-love, and kind of just coming to terms with you as a person and not letting anybody else kind of dictate what you are worth as well. But the thing that really got me with this one was the pacing was quite uneven. I kept waiting for the momentum to build a little bit, and I think this was just maybe too cozy for me. It was very low stakes, and going into a cozy fantasy, that is what you expect, but there was almost no stakes, even though some of the things that were being discussed in here could have been a bit darker. I think I just wasn't expecting it to be so far on the other end of cozy, so it could have been a mistake on my part, and it's maybe just not a preference that I have. But if you're looking for something that is really low stakes, that it's just going to be a very cozy, comforting read, and you could probably read this within a day. It was a pretty quick read. This looks a bit thicker than it is because the font in here is pretty big and it's not that many pages, so you could probably read this kind of within a couple of days. But yeah, it's probably not something I'm going to reread. I may not revisit this one, but I did really like the writing style. I enjoyed the story while I was in it. It wasn't something I was kind of dying to get back into because, as I say, the stakes were so low that it didn't really matter. You kind of knew everything was going to be okay. There was a couple of storylines in here that were kind of introduced, but I don't really feel like they were used to their full potential either. So I think overall I just wanted a bit more from this and I didn't get it, but still really well written. I may read the second book in this. I probably won't buy it physically, but I may read the second book in this one or listen to the audiobook or something like that, because it was a really cozy and comforting read, but just not something that I would probably run to read. But I ended up reading this one 3.5 because, as I say, really like the writing style and definitely don't think this was a bad book. It was just maybe not my personal preference, so do with that what you will. If you really love a very low stakes cozy fantasy, you'll probably enjoy this one a little bit more than I did. So next up is a book that I thought would be a little bit lower stakes, but was actually pretty dark and pretty fast paced the whole way through, and it's not one I've heard too many people talking about, but it's A Language of Dragons by S.F. Williamson. Now I think this was the January Fairy Loot YA pick, and I had meant to read it at that time but just didn't get around to it for whatever reason. But I'm really glad that I ended up reading it in around the October time because it is a bit more of a dark academia and there was a bit of an academic setting in here, and because of the dark themes I think it was a perfect kind of autumnal read. But in this one we're following Vivian, who is living in London in 1923, and it very much has that kind of post World War I feel within here. Even though it is a slightly dystopian kind of world within this one, it definitely has that kind of World War I feel. Now Vivian has always planned to get an internship to go and study this language of dragons to help the government, and within the first kind of few pages within this, her parents have been arrested as part of the rebellion against the establishment, and her sister is missing, and she is offered this job as kind of a lifeline for her parents and her sister to assist in decoding kind of the secret language of dragons so that the establishment can use it as a weapon, essentially. So we're kind of following Vivian as she goes along on that journey, and this story was full of political unrest, it was full of emotion, and I think my favourite thing about this was the character development was absolutely perfectly done. So Vivian at the start of this wasn't really the most likeable character. You could tell she was quite selfish, she would do things for herself. She was trying to help her family, but you could tell she was very much self-motivated as well, and at times it just made her not the most likeable character. But I did find myself rooting for her the entire way through, because you could kind of see her internal turmoil, and as she made these relationships throughout the story, you couldn't do anything but root for her, and by the end of it I really loved her as a character. I think the world building in here, while it didn't need to be immense because it is kind of set within our own world, there was so much lore and kind of history behind the dragons within this. They weren't just creatures to be there and kind of feature within the story. They had their own history, they had their own mythology, they had their own languages, they had their own ways of communicating with each other, and they were very, very prominent within this story. So if you're someone like me who hates when it's kind of pitted as a dragon story and they're basically just a side character that you just hear from every now and again, I think you'll definitely like this one because they were much more involved in this story, and you could really tell the influence they had on this world within this one. I think my only little critique of this one is, again, in that middle bit, it did lag a little bit in terms of that momentum, because as I say, for the most part it was pretty fast paced, but there was a few scenes in the middle which I can kind of understand needed to be there to build some of those relationships, but I feel like they could have been a little bit less repetitive, and our main character could have been a little bit less naive in some of those. But other than that, I think this one was a real surprise to me in terms of how much I loved it. I wasn't expecting to love it so much, but I absolutely blitzed through this and cannot wait for the next book with the way that this one ends off. I think it comes out in January or February, so don't have too long to wait, but I'm really, really excited for book 2 after reading this one. And I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars, so yeah, a pretty good rating I would say. Next up, I read the arc of this book, but obviously you can tell I enjoyed it. I ended up getting a physical copy of this one, but it's Good Spirits by B.K. Borison, and this one we're following Harriet York, who kind of feels like she's a good person. She's definitely a bit of a people pleaser, but at the start of this story she ends up getting visited by the ghost of Christmas past, who is Nolan, who has told her that there's something that she's done in her past that she needs to kind of repent for or kind of make right. So we're following them along as they try and work out what it is within her past that she's done that she needs to rectify. So the main thing I really loved about this was the dynamic between Harriet and Nolan. We definitely have that grumpy sunshine dynamic in here, but it was done in a really authentic way. It didn't feel like it was forced. Harriet was definitely one of those sunshiny people that, as I say, likes to be a bit of a people pleaser, but it wasn't, as I say, feeling forced. It just felt like it was an authentic kind of personality trait for her. And similarly with Nolan, it didn't seem like he was just being grumpy for the sake of being grumpy. His personality definitely felt very authentic as well, so their dynamic together was really fun to read about. The story definitely had B.K. Borison's signature kind of witty, warm and fun writing style in there. The banter between these two was really good, and I definitely think if you're going to read this around November, December time, it's the perfect festive read as well. Reading it in October, I didn't feel like it was too Christmassy, so if you wanted to read it any other time, I'm sure it would be fine, but we're coming up to the best time of year to probably read this one. It definitely had that festive feel within there, and again, it was just a really cozy and comforting read for me. It did get a little bit more emotional towards the end of this book than I was expecting, and I definitely felt like I was nearly ready to shed a bit of a tear at the end because it was so impactful, and I think that's because we had such a connection with these characters throughout the story. I mean, this isn't that long of a book, but I do feel like we got a really good connection with the characters, and it just meant that we were rooting for them the entire way through. So when we got to the end and some things were happening, it definitely felt very emotional for me. The only thing I would have liked a bit more is the fact that Nolan was kind of the ghost of Christmas past to be a bit more prominent and kind of the difficulties there. While we were kind of exploring that, I feel we were very much more exploring Harriet's past and kind of his past and kind of the more human side of it. But other than that, I just really enjoyed this one. I think it was a perfect romance. I really loved the story. I was gripped from the first page. It kind of gave me the same feels as if you've ever watched the story Last Christmas, I think it's called, and it has Emilia Clarke in it. I really love that movie, and I think this had similar vibes because it had kind of an antique shop that she was working in, and if you watched the movie and you've read the book, you might understand the connection that I'm making there. I think it was very similar in terms of the vibes. So if you like that movie and you want to get kind of those same vibes within a book, I definitely recommend this one. But yeah, yet again, an almost perfect book, and I ended up rating this one 4.5 stars. Next up, I had a vlog where I was reading spooky books for a week, and the first book that I picked up was Immortal Dark by Tigist Garma. Now, this one is a dark academia set around vampires. It definitely has a lot of black heritage and representation in here, specifically around Ethiopian kind of folklore and mythology. And in this one, we're following this orphaned heiress, Kidan, who is basically in search for her sister. Her sister went missing, and she's convinced that these vampires within this academy are responsible for it. She is the heiress for one of the houses that are kind of responsible for this academy. So she ends up going to the academy to stake her claim to the house that's there and try and use the resources there to find her sister and work out what happened to her. Now when she gets there is a vampire who is kind of assigned to this house, and the house was actually left to him by her parents. So we're following Kadan as she's trying to work out why her parents would do that, all the while as she's trying to kind of get this vampire out of this house. So there's a lot of scenes where they're kind of pitting against each other to try and get the other to leave the house, because the vampire, who's called Susenyos, needs her to leave the house and be in the house on his own for 28 days before he can inherit the house. So there's a lot of butting heads with those two, and one thing I really enjoyed about this is it is pitted as enemies to lovers. The enemy aspect in here was definitely prominent from the very start, and it was done in exactly the right way. You know, there was definitely a reason why they should be enemies. They shouldn't be kind of together or anything, and I really loved the way that that was done. This is very high stakes. I think there was a lot of dark and kind of gruesome things discussed in here, and this is a YA, and I do think it was a lot darker than I would expect for a YA. There were definitely themes that were touched upon in here that I maybe wouldn't expect in a YA, and this probably would be more suited to the new adult category, but it's in YA. But it's just a heads up to check out trigger warnings for this one before picking it up, because there's quite a few themes in here that are discussed that I would say are problematic because they're maybe not dealt with in the way I would expect they should be in a YA. But obviously if you're an adult, it's just about checking out the trigger warnings and making sure there's nothing in there that would trigger you. I really love the kind of dark and moody setting in here, and I feel like it was done really well, and I could really palpably feel what this university looked like, how it felt, and where our characters were situated. But one thing that definitely held me back from connecting with this one was I didn't feel like I had a connection with the characters, and for me I think a lot of it is because there was a lot of telling versus showing. Now I have concerned this is a debut novel, so I definitely give it a bit of grace for that, but there was a mechanism used in here to give us some information about kind of the background of this story, and it was basically through letters sent from Kidan's aunt to her, and it's just a device that I don't really love. I don't really love having to read paragraphs of a story that should be kind of natural within the storytelling, if that makes sense. I'd rather it just be done through dialogue with characters and learn along with the characters as we go through the story, rather than just having to read excerpts from a letter that kind of tells us everything. So we definitely had that, and then there was a few what I call kind of Scooby-Doo moments where people find out what has been happening and someone just kind of rams off everything that's happened, how they done it, how they got away with it, and things like that. So it's definitely a personal thing. It's just something that I am quite sensitive to, and as soon as I pick up that that's the writing device that someone has, it's all I can see when I'm reading the book. So do take what I say with a pinch of salt in terms of some of my views on this one and kind of my rating. I do think that I was very much honing in on that and concentrating on that show versus tell versus show in the way that this was written. So it did definitely hold me back from connecting with the characters in this one, and even though I think there was some quite impactful kind of reveals and things like that, I just didn't feel it because I didn't have that connection there. But in saying that, I do think that I still really enjoyed the story in here, and I am interested in reading the second book, and I've heard that we do get a second POV in there, which I think will definitely enrich my experience. And as I say, it's a debut novel, and considering it is a debut novel, the writing style in here in terms of the prose was still really beautiful, even though I didn't like that kind of storytelling device. I did really like the prose and the way it was written, and I'll still be interested in picking up book 2, but as I say, just because of that feel in connection with the characters, I ended up rating this one 3.5 stars, but it is still a series that I'm interested in continuing, so when the next one comes out I probably will still read it. Next up in that video I read Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid, and this is one that's been on my TBR for such a long time. It's a retelling of The Juniper Tree, so I haven't read that. It's a Brothers Grimm's fairy tale, but I haven't read it, but this is kind of a horror retelling of that story, and I will say that this definitely leaned into that horror side of things, so it's kind of pitted as a dark fairy tale, but it definitely has a lot of horror elements in here. It was quite gory and quite gruesome, so just a heads up if it's one you're going to pick up, there is quite a few body, gore and horror aspects in here, so just be mindful of that before you're picking this one up. But in this one we're following Marlinchin, who is the youngest daughter of this kind of warlock who lives in a world that is becoming industrialized. He doesn't really like that, and he does kind of keep his 3 daughters away from that. They're very much set in their old ways, doing like tinctures for cures and things like that, and people do come to them to try and get those, so that's how they make their money. They're basically the witches within this town, and at the start of this story we see the 2 oldest sisters finally taking Marlinchin, the youngest, out to see the city. They're sneaking out because they're not allowed to kind of integrate with society there. Their father doesn't want them going out into the city, but they're sneaking out and they start to see kind of what the city has to hold and seeing what life could be outside of their house. And we follow the story from there, and I think the best thing about this one was just how uncomfortable it made me feel. It definitely delivered that kind of horror, eerie, kind of your skin crawling feeling that you would expect from a horror like this, and it was really interesting it was done that way. Even though the prose in here is really lush and really beautiful, you were still just feeling that really uncomfortable feeling the entire way through reading this. Again, definitely check out trigger warnings for this one. There's a lot in here that I would think would could be pretty triggering. Definitely holds no bars, doesn't hold back, and there's a lot that is explored in here that for me reading it was extremely uncomfortable. Even though I don't really have any triggers, luckily, it was extremely uncomfortable to read a lot of this. So this isn't an airy fairy kind of dark fairy tale. There's not going to be a whimsical end to this one. It's very much a dark fairy tale horror, so keep that in mind before you delve into this one. I think a lot of people could think that the pacing in this is very slow, and there isn't really a lot that happens, but what we're really exploring here is the characters within this, and the characters are the strength within it. For me anyway, that's what I felt. I felt like I was really getting a lot about this main character Marlynch and kind of her character development, her processing kind of her trauma and her grief, and just following her along in that with some of the, as I say, it's quite an uncomfortable setting that we're following, but it is really beautifully written, and even though it is that kind of disturbing feel, I could still appreciate some of the really beautiful prose in here. And yeah, I don't think this is a book that I would recommend to everyone just because of some of the things that are in here, and I definitely don't think this is a book that everyone would enjoy. As I say, it's quite slow paced, there's not a lot of plot but a lot of character development in here, but it definitely does what it sets out to do. Made me feel uneasy the whole way reading it, and overall I ended up rating this one 4 stars. And then last up in that video I read The Hollow Places by T. Kingfisher, and I'm really disappointed in this one because T. Kingfisher is a favourite author of mine, but most of the books I've read from her are more of her fairy tale-esque stories. This one is more horror leaning, and I didn't really love it. So in this one we're following Cara, who is recently divorced. She has to move back home. She's about to move in with her mother, but her uncle actually offers for her to live with him, as her and her mother kind of butt heads quite a lot. They love each other, but they're not really the best in terms of dynamics. So her uncle offers to let her stay with him for a while, and he has this kind of antique shop that is almost like a museum. It has kind of all these weird and wonderful things in there. She remembers working in there as a child, so while she's staying there she offers to help work within this museum while she's building up kind of her freelance graphic designer business as well. Her uncle ends up getting hurt and has to go and stay with her mother, ironically, so she's left there alone to look after the shop, and while she's there she ends up finding kind of this hole in the wall that the barista from the next door coffee shop helps her to investigate, because they're kind of like, where does this hole lead to? What's behind here? When they open it they realise there's kind of this almost alternate reality within the wall. They find this bunker with this writing in there, they become a little bit obsessed and they try and figure out what's going on, and the story goes from there. I think for me this one, it had a lot of momentum built up until around the 40% mark. I did really enjoy it. I was enjoying kind of the horror aspects within there. It definitely felt like a true horror. I kind of thought I could envisage where this story was going to go, and as I say, the momentum was building really steadily up until that 40% mark. After that mark it kind of felt like nothing happened. I'm not really sure where we went with the story. I feel like it was kind of lost a little bit. I feel like the dynamic between Simon and Cara, so the barista and Cara, was almost feeling a lot more forced in the second half. They were definitely very bantery at the start, you know, kind of keeping themselves feeling light because there was quite a stressful situation going on, but it almost felt very forced in the second half, and I kind of lost my love for them. I will say for the last kind of 20% I was definitely skimming this because it just kind of felt like, what was the point when I got to the end of this one? And yeah, I just didn't really end up loving this one. It is definitely more sci-fi leaning. I don't know if that impacted my enjoyment. I'm not a huge sci-fi reader, but for me I think it was definitely just more that there wasn't really much of a point to the story by the end of it, in my opinion anyway. Maybe I missed something, I'm not sure, but didn't end up really enjoying this one. I think I put it at 3 stars on Goodreads because I don't think it was badly written. I think the prose in here were quite good, but in terms of the story and my enjoyment, I just didn't really enjoy it. So as I say, I put it as 3 stars on Goodreads. It probably would be more of a 2.5 for me, but I didn't want to give it a 2 stars. I feel like that's too low. But yeah, didn't really love this one. May just be a personal preference thing in terms of being more sci-fi leaning, more horror leaning, but quite sad about this one because I do love T. Kingfisher, but I will still try some of her other horror leaning stories to see if I enjoy them. It may just be that her horror stories aren't for me, but this one certainly wasn't, unfortunately. So yeah, ended up rating it around a 2.5 to a 3 star. Then next up I did have the ARC for this one as well, but as I say, ended up really loving it, so got a physical copy, and that's Girl Dinner by Olivia Blake. So if you've been here for a while, you'll know that Olivia Blake is one of my absolute favourite authors. So I basically had this pre-ordered as soon as it was announced, so it didn't even matter that I got the ARC, I was going to be buying this one. But in this one we're following Sloane, who is a professor at this kind of university, and she's just been off for around 18 months with her newborn baby, and it's very much in this book kind of exploring her love of motherhood, her guilt at leaving her baby at daycare and things like that. So there's a lot of themes around motherhood in here, but we're also following this kind of sorority within this university, and in that kind of storyline we're following Nina, who is trying to become part of the sorority, and we're kind of watching their storylines merge together within here. And I'm not sure how much details I want to give you about this one because it isn't very plot heavy. There isn't a lot that kind of happens in here. It is very much more about the characters, and there's a theme in here that you may be able to guess from what it's called, but I don't really want to give away too much of the details in this one because I think you are better going in a little bit blind. But what I will say is I do feel that we get a very intimate understanding of our characters here. It is quite unsettling at times, and it's definitely a bit of a psychological thriller in that sense. And it's very much about the perceptions of, as I say, motherhood, kind of comparing yourself to other people, keeping up with the Joneses, shall we say, and constantly feeling like you're not enough in whatever aspect of your life it may be. So there's a lot of different themes in there that you can definitely relate to. But as I say, there is a little bit of that psychological thriller element in here as well. And I just think that I really loved how it was kind of really showcasing the contradictions in the way modern women are supposed to be, kind of that aspect of striving to have it all, to be the perfect mother, to have the best career, to never have a hard place, to be able to cook all the dinners, to be able to host all the parties, while also being kind of that girl boss on the side as well. And it was just a really interesting exploration of that, and as always it had the really lush and beautiful writing that I love from Olivia Blake while we're exploring that. It did get a little bit unhinged at times, but I really loved the way that she explored some of that. And I would say if you liked Bunny by Mona Awad but you didn't want it to be so much of a fever dream, you may end up enjoying this one, because it had very similar themes, I would say, in terms of the sorority side of things, but it didn't have as much of that kind of, is this real, isn't this real? Everything that's happening in here you can kind of tell it's real, but it's unhinged, but it's not kind of that fever dream writing, if that makes sense. So yeah, if you enjoyed Bunny by Mona Awad, you may end up enjoying this one as well. I will say it probably wasn't my absolute favourite from Olivia Blake. I did really enjoy it, but I ended up rating it 4 stars. I think there was a few things in here that I maybe would have liked to have a little bit differently, but overall still really enjoyed it. She's still solidified as one of my absolute favourite authors. A little bit different than some of the other books I've read from her, but as I say, still really enjoyed it and ended up rating it 4 stars. And then last up, I actually read The Everlasting by Alex E. Harrow. Again, this was an arc that I had that I ended up loving so much that I got a physical copy of it. So if you've been here a while, you may know that Alex E. Harrow is an author that I've kind of struggled with. I've read a few of her books and for whatever reason I just haven't really connected with the characters, but I've really loved the prose and the writing. I've really enjoyed kind of her writing style, but the stories have just always fell flat for me for whatever the reason may be. This is a book that finally, just for me, it just clicked. I really loved the story. I really loved the characters. I was invested from page 1. Couldn't put it down. Read it really quickly as well. And as I say, loved it so much that I ended up getting a physical copy of this one. So in this one we're following 2 different characters. We're following Una Everlasting, who is kind of this great war hero that's from kind of years back in this kingdom called the Dominion, and it's always kind of been ravaged by war, but Una is this knight that served under this queen who is kind of a legend. If you think of kind of like King Arthur and Lancelot, she would probably be like the Lancelot of that time. And then we're following this historian in kind of current times within this world who is obsessed with her story, has always loved her folklore and her story, and is kind of dealing with his own demons in terms of he has served in the war. His father also served in the war, ended up becoming an alcoholic afterwards. He served in the war but was kind of seen as a bit of a coward. He's not really the biggest man or kind of the most brave man either, so we're kind of seeing him struggle with that. But as I say, he's been obsessed with her story for quite some time, and the way that the story is kind of tied together, it's his story and Una's story kind of end up getting entangled in some way, and that's all I really want to say about this one. But with this one I just really loved the storytelling in here. It did feel a little bit repetitive up until the 40% mark just because of a story device that is being used here, but other than that I just really loved the prose in here. It felt really haunting and really romantic as well, even though I would say that there wasn't that much romance in this really, and if you've read it you'll really know what I mean, but it just felt so romantic. There was a lot of yearning in here. If you're someone that really enjoys reading about 2 characters yearning for each other, this is definitely going to be the book for you. It was really palpable in here, and I think this definitely had themes of kind of exploring what it means to be remembered, what it means to make a legend, how that can kind of impact someone living up to that legend that they're being said to be, and what you're willing to sacrifice for that. And there were definitely a few feminist themes in here as well, and just the way that it was put in this kind of lyrical and beautiful story about love and self-love and yearning, just really perfectly done. It's a very lyrical and introspective fantasy. It does have a plot device of kind of time loops and going back in time, and for me it was just a story almost about storytelling and kind of the impact that has on people. And yeah, just really loved this one. If you like Alex E. Harrow, you'll probably absolutely love this one. As I say, just for some reason the characters and things like that in her previous works just haven't worked for me for the ones that I've read, but I really love this one, and I couldn't be happier that I found a book from her that I absolutely loved, because the writing style has always been really stand out to me. I just haven't been able to find a book that I've loved by her, so really happy that I ended up loving this one. And as I say, just because it felt a little bit repetitive up until that 40% mark, I ended up rating this one 4.5, but it was definitely probably near enough to that 5-star for me, and that is me being picky, so do with that what you will. But yeah, this is just out, so if you haven't read this one, I would definitely recommend picking this one up because it was a really good read. So that's it. That's all the books I read in October. As I say, I feel like I had a really good month. There was quite a few really highly rated highlighted books there, quite a few new favourites as well. So overall I feel like I had a great month of reading in October. Let me know if you've read any of these and if you enjoyed them, if you agree or disagree with anything I've said. I'd really love to know your thoughts and opinions. And let me know your favourite book that you read in October. If you don't have anything to comment, just put a little book emoji to let me know you got to the end. If you like this video, do remember to give it a like, and if you want to see more from me, remember to subscribe. I post 2 videos per week and it's videos like this, so wrap-ups, TBR jars, book shopping, all good bookish things like that. Other than that, thanks so much for watching this one. I hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you in the next one soon. Bye!
Find a place to be alone. Look into your eyes, feeling by